leave the dead to bury their dead. What did Jesus mean by that? It was supposed to be his rejoinder to the answer of a prospective disciple to Jesus' call to discipleship. And Jesus said, "Follow me." Take note, the man did not turn Jesus down. What he said instead was, "Let me go first and bury my father." His answer was neither a plain yes nor a plain no, but yes, but. Yes, I will follow you, but you would have to wait until I have buried my father. Parang reasonable naman, di ba? At the outset, it is a perfectly reasonable condition or request. Except, of course, if the father was not dead yet. In that case, what he really meant was, would you please wait until my father has died and I have done my filial duty of burying him? You know, in the Jewish culture, this is particularly applicable especially to the panganays, the firstborn son. He cannot afford to leave because he will not be able to claim his inheritance by virtue of birthright as a firstborn, as a panganay, if he is not able to carry out his duty of burying his father. If we read between the lines, what the man is actually saying to Jesus is, "Lord, sayang naman. Let me stay muna until I have acquired my inheritance. Then perhaps I can start following you when I have secured my financial stability already." It's not a bad reasoning, really, no? Is it? It sort of reminds me of that dutiful but spiteful elder brother in the famous parable of the Prodigal Son. Pero anong sagot ni Jesus? Leave the dead to bury their dead. Iwan daw ang mga patay na maglibing sa kanilang mga patay. Maybe what he really meant was leave the spiritually dead to bury the physically dead. In plain language, those who do not bother to pursue their life's goal and mission are as good as spiritually dead. Especially if they are waiting to bury their parents, not really because they love them, but rather because they are only eager to get their share of the manna, of the properties that their parents will leave behind. Para bang buitre. They're like vultures waiting to feed on carcasses. They're the dead who are not just burying the dead, but feeding on the dead. Well, today we also celebrate the feast of the first Filipino saint and martyr, San Lorenzo Ruiz. And you know, I call him a man of paradoxes. First, I wonder why he was made into a patron saint of catechists. Of course, obviously because he had been enlisted to join the mission to Japan as a catechist. But he was never really able to catechize in Japan because he and his companions were immediately arrested as soon as their boat landed in Nagasaki. Apparently, Lorenzo was running away because he had been falsely accused of murdering a Spaniard in Manila. But the fact that the Dominican missionaries took him in anyway could only mean they believed that he was truly innocent. and that he could be of great service in the mission, having served in Binondo as a parish escribano or a parish secretary. Siguro, dapat ginawa na lang siyang patron saint of parish secretaries. The other paradox about him is this. He was running away from imprisonment and death sentence in the Philippines, only to be imprisoned and sentenced to death in Japan. He was not even able to join the missionary work that he volunteered for. Like I said, he and his companions were imprisoned by the Tokugawa regime upon their arrival in Nagasaki on charges of serving as agents of the Spanish colonial empire. Now, an additional paradox is the fact that he was a Dominican, a member of the Cofradia del Santísimo Rosario, not really a religious, not really an ordained Dominican, para bang third order. And yet, the most important document that served as a conclusive basis for his earlier beatification and his later canonization was not produced by the Dominicans, but rather by the Jesuits. The document was discovered in the archives of the Jesuit Generalate in Rome. It was part of the testimonies of Jesuits who had witnessed the execution of Lorenzo and his companions. Lorenzo was escaping death in Manila, only to end up in a worse kind of death in Nagasaki. One might say he was a victim of life's circumstances. One might say he moved from one kind of victimhood to another kind of victimhood. So bakit natin siya tinatawag na martyr? Why should we call him a martyr? Well, in a way, it is true that he could have simply died as a victim. He could have ended up bitter and regretful. He could have cursed the day he was born. He could have wallowed in self-pity. He could have questioned God. He could have said to God in his prayer, Lord, what will happen now to my wife, Rosario, and to my 3 little children in Binondo? He could have called himself a stupid fool for jumping from the fire to the frying pan. Kasabihan nga yun, no? He jumped from the fire to the frying pan. He could have simply lamented the absurdity, the meaninglessness of his fate. But instead, he chose to respond, not as a victim, but as a witness, which is what martyrdom is all about. I suspect that Lorenzo's response to Jesus' call to discipleship actually began only at that moment when he made a conscious choice to make sense of his fate, to give meaning to his death by giving witness to Christ. He had managed to run away from the sure death that awaited him when he was falsely accused in Manila, and yet he would not run away to save his skin from torture and execution in Japan. Perhaps Lorenzo had understood what Jesus said in today's gospel. Maybe he understood it differently. Maybe he understood it as a challenge. Something like, would you rather bury the dead than raise people from the dead? And so, Lorenzo Ruiz declared, if I had 1,000 lives, I would gladly offer each one to him.